The opening text states that Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay were the first ones to climb Mount Everest. After them, only a few hundred skilled climbers have tried, and sadly, 1 out of 4 didn't make it back. In 1996, a guy named Rob Hall put together a team called Adventure Consultants to climb Everest. Rob talks to his team, which includes experienced climbers like Beck Weathers, Doug Hansen, Yasuko Namba, and a co-guide named Andy Harold Harris. They all get ready for what they hope will be a great and safe journey up the mountain. 6 weeks before they start climbing, Rob and his team are in New Zealand, getting ready to leave from the airport. He's with the base camp manager, Helen Wilton, and his friend and co-worker, Guy Cotter. Rob tells them that he's arranged for journalist John Krakauer to write an article about their climb, even though Krakauer was supposed to write for another team called Mountain Madness. Before getting on the plane, Rob says bye to his pregnant wife, January. He promises he'll be back for the birth. The team arrive in Kathmandu, Nepal. Rob talks to his team about the risky altitudes and freezing temperatures they'll face in the death zone on Everest. They aim to pass through it as fast as possible before things get really dangerous. The expeditions reach the foot of the mountain and then head up to the base camp. There, Rob meets Scott Fisher, the leader of Mountain Madness. Scott is a bit annoyed that John Krakauer switched to Rob's team, but they're still cool with each other. Later, Rob introduces the team to the camp's doctor, Caroline McKenzie. She and Rob remind the climbers about the low oxygen levels at the top of Everest and the risks of hypothermia and not getting enough oxygen. Then, we see clips showing climbers suffering from the cold and sadly passing away. Beck calls his wife, Peach, from the base camp because he forgot to send her a message for their anniversary. She's not happy about him climbing mountains and has even said she'd leave him if he ever climbed another one. But Beck didn't listen to her. After that, Adventure Consultants and the other expeditions move from base camp to second camp. Along the way, they come across a fixed ladder that acts as a bridge over a crevasse. Suddenly, huge chunks of ice break off and slide down because of all the climbers' weight, causing the ladder to shake. Beck nearly falls over but manages to hang on. Rob guides him the rest of the way across, ensuring he doesn't slip. The team gather in the camp for night stay, and Rob suggests to Scott that they should combine their expeditions to ensure a safer journey to the top and to postpone their ascent for a later date. Scott is unsure at first, mentioning their different climbing styles, but eventually agrees to merge the teams. Later, they gather with their teams and announce their plan to have 8 oxygen tanks available at the top. Scott's guide, Anatoly Bukreev, decides he won't use oxygen. Rob encourages the rest of his team to use oxygen for safety. At night, the Adventure Consultants team gathers in a tent to talk about why they're climbing. Doug shares that he wants to show that even an ordinary person can achieve the impossible. Yasuko expresses her goal to become the oldest woman to climb Everest. As they reach the summit, the teams face various challenges. Some climbers, like Doug and Scott, start feeling sick. Beck struggles with his vision due to a surgery he had a year earlier. Additionally, there are no fixed ropes over the south summit, causing some climbers to have to turn back. Beck decides to stay behind on the southeast ridge. Meanwhile, Guy, who is climbing a nearby mountain, observes Rob and his team from his perspective. He contacts them to make sure everything's all right. Eventually, some of the climbers reach the summit of Everest and claim their spots. Anatoly is the first to touch the top, followed by Yasuko, who places a Japanese flag there. Rob calls Helen at base camp to share the news that they've reached the summit. Helen and the rest of the camp cheer on the team in celebration of their achievement. Doug continues climbing, even though his health is getting worse and his oxygen levels are dropping. Rob encounters him on the descent and tells him it's time to call it quits, assuring him that he gave it his best shot. However, Doug isn't ready to give up yet and expresses his desire to keep going. Touched by Doug's determination, Rob decides to help him reach the top. Together, they press on toward the summit. As they all reach the top of the mountain, a massive blizzard heads towards Everest, posing a serious threat to the climbers descending from the summit. Rob and Doug are caught in the storm as it hits the mountain, forcing them to seek shelter. As they descend further, Rob realizes that the oxygen tanks he requested aren't where they should be, so he contacts Helen at base camp to send them up. Despite the worsening winds, Rob and Doug continue moving downward. However, Doug, barely conscious and disoriented, unbuckles himself from Rob's guide rope. The combination of his dizziness and the strong wind causes him to slip and fall over the edge to his death. Beck's vision deteriorates further, and Scott begins to suffer from hypothermia, causing them to stay behind while the rest of their groups continue on. The other climbers go for help, leaving Beck with Yasuko. Meanwhile, Andy joins Rob, who informs him about Doug's fate. Together, they wait on the side of the mountain for conditions to improve. However, Andy starts experiencing hypoxia, causing him to believe he's overheating. In a confused state, he removes his clothes, which tragically leads to his death. Helen, sitting in the tent with Caroline and Guy, radios Rob and encourages him to continue descending. Rob informs her that his hands and feet are frozen, and he shares the devastating news that Doug and Andy didn't make it. This news brings everyone in the tent to tears. Helen then calls Jan and puts the phone next to the walkie-talkie, so Jan can talk to Rob. Jan urges her husband to make it down safely, reminding him of their upcoming baby's birth and the importance of his return. Helen informs Rob that the team meant to bring him the oxygen tanks can't make it due to the harsh conditions. Despite his efforts to continue moving on his own, Rob knows he can't make it in his condition. He collapses and contacts Helen again. Helen calls Jan once more so she can talk to Rob for the last time. Rob reassures Jan that he's comfortable and asks about their baby, Sarah. Tearfully, Jan agrees to name her Sarah. Rob's final words to her are, "Sleep well, my sweetheart. Please don't worry too much." Rob tragically passes away under the snow and ice, unable to survive the harsh conditions. Scott also succumbs to the cold, lying in the snow to meet his end. Yasuko has also sadly died. Despite being frostbitten, partially blind, and nearly frozen, Beck manages to muster the strength to get up and slowly make his way back to camp. John spots him and radios Helen, informing her that Beck is alive. Helen quickly contacts Peach to share the incredible news. Together, they arrange for a helicopter to fly up and bring Beck back to safety. The helicopter faces challenges from the strong winds and added weight, but they successfully manage to bring Beck down to lower altitude where he can receive warmth and medical attention. Helen and the remaining climbers return home, where they are greeted by Jan at the airport. Tearfully, they embrace each other, sharing in their grief and relief. Meanwhile, Beck also returns home and shares a heartfelt hug with Peach, grateful to be reunited with his loved ones. In this way, movie ends here. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more interesting movie recaps.